Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Conservatorium. My name is Neal Costa. I'm Associate Dean of Research here, and on behalf of Professor Anna Reid, who's the Dean of the Conservatorium, she's actually away on much needed and also deserved long service leave. I welcome you to this Alfred Hook lecture. This is going to be a very special evening. I also would like to mention and welcome special guests here, including our wonderful Professor Emeritus Malcolm Gillies, who's in the room with us, a very good friend of Liza Lim's. I'd like to start by saying, of course, that we are on very special and sacred country here at the Conservatorium and really everywhere in Australia. We're on Gadigal country, and so is the main campus of the university. Here, however, is a place where music and dance have been performed and heard for millennia. It's a place of great cultural significance of ceremony and knowledge exchange through singing and dancing. And with our Indigenous folks, of course, we know their respect for the country, for the land, for water, for air, for a multitude of living and non-living things. And so it is with great respect that I acknowledge the original custodians of this land on which the University of Sydney central campuses sits, and also these are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I also acknowledge all other First Nations peoples on whose ancestral lands the University of Sydney's other campuses are built and its education and research facilities are situated. And I pay tribute to their elders past, present, and to emerge. Tonight is a very special evening because it's part, really, of ongoing celebrations of our esteemed colleague, Professor Liza Lim, SCM Sculthorpe Chair of Australian Music. And we have been, over the last couple of months, celebrating her extraordinary trajectory as a composer, scholar, and educator, which has been rightly recognised by the Australian Research Council in her recent award of a prestigious 5-year laureate fellowship. She's the first composer and I think the first musician actually to be awarded an ARC laureate. I hope I'm not wrong about that, but I think that's absolutely amazing and so well deserved. And I think it's pertinent to mention Liza's laureate program, even though that's not going to be the subject of her delivery today. But she's going to investigate how music can enable a reimagining of our human relation with the world. And it's going to explore how innovative musical approaches can reconfigure our experience of the interconnection between human and non-human agents to rethink justice, hope, and belonging amidst the noise and death and extinction. And that's her words from her application, and I asked her permission to say that tonight. Her program is innovative because it focuses on connecting the arts to the wider global movements of multi-species justice that take up the moral, political, and legal claims of animals, plants, rivers, forests, and ecosystems that are bound up with the fate and well-being of humans. And importantly, after having acknowledged the country, Lisa's program will incorporate long overlooked Australian Indigenous understandings of the ecological sovereignty of the country. Lisa's work is such an important work for us at the Conservatorium, and it's part of a kind of very vibrant research dynamic that takes place here. Our research extends across subdisciplines of music from Indigenous to Western classical, non-Western musics, jazz, contemporary, popular music, technology, and recently also music theatre, which is really wonderful. And we support artistic research, music diversity, musicology, and music education. Those are the broad areas. And we also foster collaborations in multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work at the University of Sydney through working with our multidisciplinary institutions such as the Sydney Environment Institute, the Brain and Mind Centre, the China Studies Centre, Sydney Nano, and the Charles Perkins Centre. And importantly, for us, we also host Paradisec, a world-class digital archive of records from the many cultures of the Pacific region and beyond. So I'd just like to say a few words about the Hook Lecture because, of course, this is supported by a bequest. The bequest is in celebration of Alfred Samuel Hook, who was actually an architect who believed that architecture, like music, was an art vital to people's prosperity. And he helped found the University of Sydney's Faculty of Architecture in 1918 and was its dean until he retired in 1949. But he also loved music. He gave lunch hour talks on music, illustrated by the university's then collection of gramophone records. And he was also a member of the university choral group, a keen organist, and he was associated with the installing of the university's War Memorial Carillon in 1928. And this is only one of 3 carillons in the country. And importantly for many of us here, he also founded the Department of Music in 1948, which I actually studied at. So a lot of us did. So the Alfred Hook Lecture is made possible through a generous bequest from Doreen Robson, who isn't here tonight. I first heard about Liza Lim actually through my partner Danny, who had the great opportunity and honour to play in her wonderful chamber opera, The Navigator, which had performances in Melbourne, Brisbane, Berlin and Moscow a few years ago. And I remember Danny coming home after the first rehearsal, absolutely thrilled and excited, and just said, "This is ahead of its time, it's cutting edge sounds." He found that the music was very sensual, and it was Barry Kosky, of course, so that all added to it, and that it really captured his attention. And that also people were challenged to their core with what they were hearing and seeing. And he also mentioned that in Berlin and Moscow, for example, where audiences really love the avant-garde, people there really appreciated what they heard in Lisa's music. We were very fortunate because she came to the Conservatorium in 2017, and a lot of us got to know her better at that point. She came as the Professor of Composition, and then in 2019, she took up the post, the first composer to do so, of the Sculthorpe Chair of Australian Music. And of course, since then, things have blossomed at the Conservatorium in terms of what she's brought to it. She was very much a leader of the CON's Composing Women's Gender Equity Program, and this has had very far-reaching consequences, and it's been recognised, of course, internationally for its work. Her music is really a collaborative and transcultural in practice, and it explores themes of ecological connection and female spiritual lineages at the heart of recent works. As Sculthorpe Chair, she's now going to talk to us tonight about, and her talk is entitled Flow States and Ecology in Music. We're also going to hear a premiere of her new work, Calling the Ancestral River, performed by members of ELISION, joined by Swedish violinist Karin Hellqvist. So I'd love to invite now Lisa to give her address and her talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Neal, for that warm welcome, and good evening, everyone. Here we are. We're gathered together and we're here at the Con, and I also want to acknowledge that we are on unceded land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the ancestors and the elders for their custodianship of an extraordinary living knowledge that has been sung and storied here for thousands of generations. And it's really that extraordinary time horizon that I want to connect to some of the themes of the talk tonight, that is flow and ecology. So I want to explore the importance and the interconnections of these ideas through conversation and music. You know, when you think about the flow of time, where does the past end and the present begin? Where's that transformation point? And when you take a sort of larger or bigger ecological picture, where are the edges of who we are? Where do I end and you begin? And where do you end and I begin? So, we often use metaphors connected to rivers to talk about the flow of time and transformation. So I want to begin with a story. And the story is about a river in Yellowstone National Park in the States. So here's the story. After decades of extinction, in 1995, 14 wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park. And that's when things got really interesting, because the behavior of all the animals there started to shift. The elk stopped grazing by the riverbank, And that meant that there was less erosion, and then the trees started to recover. And because there were more willow trees, the beaver population bounced back. And the beavers were making dams, and they were affecting the flow of the river, and ultimately changed the course of the river. So that's the river story. And it's really a story about what we call trophic cascades. So that's a fancy term for, I guess, the indirect interactions that control and condition ecosystems. But it also gives us a way of thinking about change in other contexts. And so an example close to home that I want to discuss for a little bit about how different orders of change interact to give really complex and perhaps unpredictable outcomes is the CON's highly strategic Composing Women program. So this was an initiative of Professor Matthew Heinsohn. He began it in 2016, and then when I joined the CON, I took it up in 2018, and it actually completed in 2023. So, really the important purpose of Composing Women was to model what does it look like for women in music to claim space in the music profession. And back in 2016, there were all these reports that came out, and all the statistics showed that there was a kind of hard ceiling of 20% in terms of women's participation and presence in the music industry. And in a lot of cases, it was less than that. And so responding to that, the CON set up this program, and we partnered with a lot of key flagship arts companies, so the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra, Sydney Chamber Opera, Sydney Dance Company, the Philharmonia Choirs, and then also people like Claire Chase, the star American flautist. We did projects here in Sydney, and then also New York and Harvard. It was phenomenally successful because, women in music have something to say, and they don't have any problems writing operas and stage works and for film and for dance and orchestral works. They just have to be allowed in. But actually all of this activity is what I'd call first order change. So that's when new participants or previously excluded people come into a space and they change how things look. And so that was a sort of definite sort of first win for the Composing Women program. And then we start to see deeper systemic change, so second order change, because several graduates of the program have now taken up positions here at the CON, teaching composition, also creative industries, digital music. And so importantly, this is part of a changing zeitgeist. It's not just those graduates, but it's other women, more diverse participants coming in and taking up positions in these areas, not just composition, also musicology and jazz. And this is really interesting. It's not gender equal yet. Inclusivity is an ongoing project and process, but things are much less stuck. And actually we're talking change that has really kicked in only in the last year. So it's kind of absurdly recent. But then we can start to see the beginnings of third order, or so-called schematic change. So the first order is sort of symptoms, changing how things look. Second order is systemic, like who's got power, how do people see themselves in leadership roles. And third order, with the presence of more diverse people, it's impacting how the system itself sees and thinks about itself. That means what can be prioritized, what's valued in terms of teaching and learning and research. And I see, because I've been at the CON now for some years, so I can see a further shift, and that is where the conversation about equity and justice, it's coming from an attitude which is that justice for one group is bound up with justice for all, which really reminds me of my former next door neighbour in Brisbane, the Murray Eldon artist, Auntie Lila Watson. She always said, if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. So that's a really exacting and rigorous and exciting and inspiring place. So I'm really inspired by what's happening here. So I was going to just briefly touch on the ARC laureate that Neal mentioned. This will begin next March, and I will be talking much more about it later. But it does really focus on these broadened concepts of justice, music and multi-species justice. And multi-species justice is saying that the rights of nature are intimately bound up with the fate, the health, the well-being of humans. And that humans, we can and need to move to a place where we're not just at the apex of everything, but we can move towards more reciprocal, relational, ecologically holistic ways of knowing and being and doing. And that music and the arts, I guess the project is asserting that these ways of knowing can really bring vitality to knowledge and introduce sort of different ways of approaching problems and stuck situations. And so that's something I'm going to be working on with a whole team of people, and really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. But yeah, I guess, as you can see, one of the things that interests me and fascinates me is patterns. So what the Gregory Bateson, the great anthropologist and systems thinker, called the pattern that connects. So, what are the patterns in the things we pay attention to? What patterns emerge out of who we listen to and then also who we don't listen to? I've got a nice picture here. So, hopefully you can spot the insect in this picture, in the middle of this photo. I actually grew up with these fabulous rainforest insects. I had a childhood in Brunei. Perhaps some people had, stick and leaf insects as pets. So this is the dead leaf mantis, Deroplatus desiccate. And as you can see, its body mimics the dead leaves and twigs of the forest floor in which it lives. So in this leaf insect, we see how the life of the forest is patterned in the life of the animal. It's like the insect describes the forest and the forest describes the insect. We can't sever or, kind of separate the connection between these. And, as I look at something like this, it's also becoming part of me. I'm being drawn into this whole, ecosystemic relation. It's shaping what I can think and imagine, just as that example of the rivers showed that how rivers are part of how we think and our use of language. So this is an amazing relational pattern, this brilliant mirroring down to that half-chewed leaf at the top of its body. This is life, a seriously playful ecological attention and attentiveness. I want to just bring into this room a quote from the Australian ecologist, Deborah Bird-Rose, a real sort of hero of mine. And she says, "Life itself desires pattern and connection, the threads through which life gains meaning. These are finally braided into a holistic pattern, appearing somewhat like a third dimension." So she's really talking about how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is this third order change, this third dimensional kind of form, where something larger emerges out of the interaction of individuals. And I just love this image of the braided river from Iceland. For me, this is like a map of time and the flow of experience and the patterns that are woven from that, but here in this extraordinary landscape. So holistic patterns, these third order, third dimensional patterns, they operate at a level where boundaries dissolve between types of things and where resonance increases. And, they're hard to talk about, right, because they're so super complex. But one place where we can experience the qualities of these very powerful connecting forces of this kind of patterning is when we experience flow states. So the idea of flow has been around for a while. It's actually, a huge research topic in music, and our new colleague, Stefan Herf, is looking at the capacities of flow. But it's been around since the 1970s. It was established by the Hungarian-American psychologist Csikszentmihalyi. Here we are. Every academic conference I've ever been to, there's a prize for whoever can spell and say this name. And this is going to win you the pub quiz, right? So Csikszentmihalyi, he was studying the motivation of people doing activities for pleasure rather than money or fame, and defined, one of the first people to kind of really go into defining flow states. Of course, it's been observed, for a long time. So it's a state associated with creativity in which we experience a kind of boundarylessness. Have you ever done something where you're so caught up with that activity that you lose the sense of time? And when we say we're in the zone, that often means we lose the sense of being a separate self. One's internal dialogue drops away, and you can sort of do something without distraction. So flow is connected to peak performance in artists and athletes. I think we've been seeing a bit of that in the Olympics, of course. And flow expert Stephen Kotler says flow is associated with the release of 5 performance-enhancing neurochemicals. These include dopamine and endorphins. So, hence the pleasure, hence the fun. And he also says that anyone can experience and intentionally access flow states where it feels like the activity is doing itself, or doing you, right? Doing me. So I just want to briefly bring in an example of how you can access this flow state intentionally. And this flow state exercise is called the NASA game. So it was actually developed by NASA as an exercise for astronauts. They obviously have to perform in a peak, kind of performance, way. And so these kinds of games come from what's called behavioral optometry. So that's coordinating eye movement with other kinds of actions that create a sort of mind-body challenge. It's sort of a way of hacking into your system because the eyes are part of your neurology. Eyes are part of your brain. Other senses are also part of your, creating these neural pathways. But let me just explain that. I was originally going to call for a volunteer, but I'm not going to do that. So the basic exercise is to find a point in anywhere, right? It could be a dot on a piece of paper like this, or it could be a mark on a wall. So if you're looking at this dot and you say the word up whilst looking at the dot, and then you rotate your eyes upwards and then back at the dot. Then you say the word down, and then you look down and then back. Then you say left, and you look left. Then you say right, you look right, and then back. And so the idea is to separate the word from the action. So that's the cognitive challenge, that's the mind-body split. And then you try and do this exercise and get into a rhythmic pattern. So up, down, left, right, and on. You can try this at home and see if this works for you. You have to do it for have quite a lot of repetitions. But you find that when you start to go into rhythmic sort of flow, there's a sense of alignment, the sense of internal dialogue and distractions starts to fall away. So it's a small step, I'm asserting, from the NASA flow game to see a connection with music making. Music, after all, is this fine-tuned coordination of mind and body, of timing and gesture and expression, which can create flow states. So I actually want to now introduce the performers. They may need this door open. We'll get into some musical performance and demonstration. Do you want to go on? I'm thrilled to introduce Karin Hellqvist, who's come from Stockholm on violin, Josh Hyde on saxophone, Tristan Williams on trumpet, Ben Marks on trombone, and Rohan Dasika on double bass. So we're going to hear them fairly soon. But first of all, I just want to show you the piece that I've made especially for this occasion. It's called Calling the Ancestral River, and this is the score. So it might not look like the usual sort of musical score, but like any score, it's a map. And you'll see there are various boxes in this score with various labels, song, breath, tuning, which give the rules of the game in this work. So I've made up some rules or conditions that the musicians use to make the music. And maybe something different from how you might have seen this kind of work is that I'm also playing this game as a composer using music notation. So the first part of the score, like this is my first move in playing the game, looks like this. So, this looks like music notation. I just want to digress a little bit. I've always loved music notation, especially handwriting. I actually handwrite my music. And I only realized in preparing this talk a few weeks ago that the thing about handwriting, which is this hand-eye coordination, mind-body, it's very rich as a sensory activity, puts you in a flow state. I've always had this absolutely ecstatic relation to notation, like making a mark, and it's like the mark comes alive and it's speaking to me, and it's pushing back at me. And I have this sensation that as much as I make the music is making me. So that was only an insight I got a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, let's look at this. So this is the opening. So this is my offering to the group of what a song is, and I've identified or defined song as something which is like a thread. It's a thread in time. It's like a tendril or a plant growing where there's this intelligence at the tip that's asking, where's the next moment and the next moment? And so I'm going to ask Karin to play maybe a couple of lines of this so we can hear it. Thank you. And then within the song, there are things like this. So there's kind of a suggestion of how the musicians might work with the idea of tuning, or breath, or pulse. So maybe we'll just hear a bit of breath from the group. Cool, thank you. I mean, that's quite self-evident, right? It sounds like breath. But then, so, there's a vocabulary or sort of toolkit of musical ideas derived from that original map, which the musicians can shape and weave in various ways, because then we get to much more open-ended parts. So this is like the first, into the first third of that diagram that you first looked at. And you can see there are a couple of other terms there, call and name. And call and name have a kind of temporal dimension. Each time there's a sort of past, present, and future of these kind of musical ideas or activities. But maybe, Josh, you can give an example of what call sounds like? Thank you. Yeah, Josh, maybe you want to say something about what's going on with you.
I have a beautiful tie-dyed spring drum, which is a drum with a spring on it. And that goes in the bell. It's good because it produces replicable kind of frictions with the rest of the instrument, especially in the lower.
Yeah, isn't that great? And then a name. So maybe Ben, you can just give us an example of name in the present. Okay, and do you want to say a bit about the other names that you bring into the piece?
Yeah, then in terms of developing a name and thinking about past and future, I think as we've developed the piece, we've thought about the future as some kind of development, like extending things, but then thinking about past names of this. It's quite a relationship between, not so thinking about myself perhaps, but about the instrument and the nature of the instrument itself, in terms of animal horns and things. So, things that relate to overtones and the structure of the instrument as being some kind of past self, if you like. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So we've had a whole discussion about this thing of, the name is perhaps who you identify with right now, but of course that's changing, right? So the past is accumulating behind you, and then how far back can you go, and then what is that if we're traveling in time, what is that in the future? How does the future call your name, if you like? So that's been an interesting kind of discussion that's helped shape this musical making. So where's the edge of your name, or the edge of where you are? It's constantly transforming. And just to bring it back to something previously, like the leaf insect, how does the ancestry of your forest find expression in your present or your future leafiness? Nora Bateson, the filmmaker, writer, systems thinker, she's actually the daughter of Gregory Bateson, likes to say, who am I when I'm with you? And who are you when you're with me? So this kind of really working relationally. There's no single thing. Everything is in relation to something else, and it's constantly changing. And this really informs the work that we've been doing together just in the last couple of days. And just a little bit more, something like this, name, call each other's name. So that's another kind of set of signals and relations. So maybe, let's have a listen to what the musicians do with all of this. Here's the diagram again. So this is Calling the Ancestral River. This is the premiere of the work here tonight. Thank you. Thank you so much. The amazing ELISION Ensemble, Karin, Josh, Tristram, Ben, and Rohan. Yeah, so as I hope you've experienced, this kind of music making is very much about the relational, ecological nature of listening, perceiving, receiving, leading and responding. You know, how do I bring my voice into a situation, and what kind of other patterns does that start to create? What kind of tone can I bring into a situation? And then equally, how do I, kind of make more space for someone else's voice and patterns to emerge? So the music is co-emergent and contingent on the attention and the energies that are brought into the system, just like in a river ecosystem, like the complexity of the interactions in a forest, or indeed people in any gathering and any organisation. So, what do you do with disagreement? What can you do with unity? What happens if you go completely off script? These are improvisational skills, or as the American composer, writer, and improviser George Lewis likes to say, life skills. And so when we're in flow, we're more connected to ourselves and to each other. And from that we may gain a livelier and a greater sense of possibility for life and in music. And that's not something you can write down in any score, yeah? These things can only emerge in the interactions, in that liminal in-between space amongst whoever and whatever's there. Just a last comment. The braided river, the forest, our music making are playing an amazing game of flow, connecting all kinds of living selves, calling out names from the past, present and future, singing songs of leafiness and unexpected wonder. And I just want to end with another leafy creature. This is Kallima inachus, the orange oak leaf, Indian oak leaf, or dead leaf butterfly. Yeah. So, yeah, life hides and reveals itself. Thank you so much. So much, everyone, and I think there is time for maybe a couple of questions before we can just go out into the atrium and have a drink and chat. But if anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment even, there's a mic here, yeah. To either to me or maybe to the musicians, that might be more exciting. Yeah. No? Maybe, okay. Matthew.
Thanks so much, Liza, and our musicians. There was a comment in the presentation around where does one thing begin and the other end. And as a musician myself, also, I feel like when we collaborate, there's this sense of a psychic connection that happens as you're performing, and especially if you're looking at this sort of notation. I was wondering if a couple of the musicians might like to comment on that sort of that psychic process in context of flow.
That's a good question. Who would like to? Karin, would you like to say something? Yeah, I've dubbed you in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to be sure, you said a cyclic, like a cyclical process, or psychic? Psychic like yeah. This. Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah. So maybe both of them actually somehow exist in this. But yeah, it's very interesting, I think, in a group like this. I arrived in Sydney just a few days ago, and I had never met a few of these people, and already the first rehearsal, we could immediately connect through this music to each other and to making this beautiful music. So, of course, there is some kind of flow state that we can enter together that opens this possibilities to connecting. So, yeah, I think we experienced it very much tonight also when we are here with the audience. That brings an extra layer of connectedness to it. Would you guys like to say something about it?
I think that experience that Karin's had just speaks to the relationship that this ensemble has with Liza and her music. I mean, it's kind of layers upon layers of getting to know Liza and her music and the practice that she has, and it's kind of somehow you're studying what we're doing as well as this kind of ecosystem of, you know, having listened to your pieces, played your pieces, worked together on other things, and then working with other composers. This kind of complex ecosystem that where there's connections that we're not probably aware of. Somehow they kind of are just there. And so when you arrive and you start playing this kind of music, it just happens to work. But it's because of all these intricate systems that perhaps we don't talk about, or we don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that unconscious level, which I think is what you're pointing to, and very much this non-verbal communication and knowing that's going on, very in many subtle ways, in the way in which energy is exchanged in this group. But for sure, it really has built on this deep relationships that I've had with all of these musicians over time. So, because we only started rehearsing yesterday, can you believe that? So, yeah. Thank you, Matt. Maybe there's one more thought, or Neal, you want to? Yeah.
I've been very interested in this idea of the flow state and with musicians particularly, but I was wondering about tonight and in that performance, if anyone could comment on how that felt in terms of flow, and also, you know, you told us about this exercise, and I think that's something to do about getting into a theta state or something like that, with the eyes moving up and down. But how did it feel tonight, in that sense?
I'll show maybe a page of the score, which is the flow exercise. There are these flow exercises in the score as well, where they have to line up. But Tristan, do you want to say something first?
I was just going to say, in terms of flow state, for me it's, I lose sense of the duration of the piece. Like when I get to the end of it and think, oh, look at the clock, and wow, that was 20 minutes just passed, and it could have been, there's no sense of time passing. That's my subjective experience of it. Anyhow.
Rahan, do you want to say something? Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I think, maybe another side of that as well is kind of there's so many things in this piece that kind of, I guess, are requiring you to all, I guess, enter a sort of common sort of set of like a common physical space, and sort of micro gestures in these especially the improvising sections. And that was something today I think I felt as well, that we were all sort of in some sort of common way of moving together in those sections as well, without necessarily thinking about it either.
Yeah, I think as soon as you start thinking about it, you slip out of the flow state, right? When you go, I'm really doing it, and then it's like, oh, you've lost it. So, it's a balancing act. Yeah. So, shall we? You can, okay.
I wasn't quite sure how this is going to go at the end, but Lisa, this is just wonderful to hear how this piece works and about flow state in your music, and to hear it performed live, just so wonderful. So I'd like to join hands and thank Liza and ELISION and all the musicians for this extraordinary experience that we've had.